Well, good evening. This is Micah Young with Micah Young Podcast. I want to thank you again for being with us tonight. And I just want to kind of continue what we talked about the last couple of podcasts about perspective. And today I want to kind of maybe come at it from a backdoor way to just communicate something about our perspective that I think is very significant. You know, the Apostle Paul had a whole lot to say in his epistles about knowing God. He emphasized the significance of knowing God. And he also expressed how invaluable it was to him that he personally would know the Father. You know, he even went so far as to say, I count everything that's ever been a gain to me as lost, that I might know him. And that means to know him personally, to know him intimately is the picture that he's trying to paint there. And someone might read that and say, okay, know God. What in the world? How does that look like? I mean, here's God. He's omnipotent. He's omniscient. He's omnipresent. He's in heaven. He's invisible. How do we even get to know God? What's he like? What's he even like? You know, truth of the matter is, most of us have kind of a mix of our perspective of God. And we kind of have an Old Testament perspective of God, and we have a New Testament perspective of God. We haven't really reconciled those. We just kind of see God in two different expressions. Well, I hope tonight to lay that to rest and give you some clarity about how we can know what God is like and how our perspective, it's extremely important that our perspective of the Father be accurate, because our perspective is going to determine whether we believe we can even know him. If he's, off dealing with business and the rest of the world and not that interested in us, and if we feel like he kind of holds his nose and blesses us, because he has to, because he's God. If we kind of have that perspective of God, we're going to have a real difficulty believing that he wants to know us, and an even greater difficulty believing that we could even know him. And so we kind of have this perspective of the Father that is a mix of the two. I want to try to lay some of that to rest this morning. There's a couple of verses that I want to read to you. One's in Colossians chapter 1. He's talking about Jesus. He said he rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. And here's what he says. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created. Now, you're going to see that again, so take note of that. Most of us don't have any idea that Jesus was even involved in creation. If all we have is Genesis 1, we don't really have an understanding that it was Jesus that created. He says, by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before him, and in him all things hold together. He is also the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself might come to have first place in everything. For it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him. He is the full expression of the Father, and through him to reconcile all things to himself. And then there's another verse in Hebrews chapter 1. It says, he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature. Now listen to that. He is the exact representation of his nature. That's Jesus. And upholds all things by the word of his power. When he made purification of sin, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high, having become as much better than the angels, as he inherited a more excellent glory, more excellent name than they. So there's just a hint there. Now, the Gospels reveal to us very clearly of who Jesus was and who he is and how he is that expression of the Father. And I don't think any book, just me personally, I don't think any book does that any clearer than John. Now, the fellowship that I'm a part of, we've chosen to begin to just take the book of John into the presence of Jesus, into the presence of the Father, and let him speak to us about it. Let him reveal it to us. You know, the Spirit of God lives inside of us, and he will lead us into all truth. He can reveal what he wants us to know and reveal it to us. And we've started with the book of John, because I think there's just no better book that describes who Jesus was and how that the Father manifested his fullness through Jesus. So I want to show you a couple of things in 1 John that will sound familiar to you. He says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Then he almost shifts and he says, he was in the beginning with God, indicating that the Word was a he. Now, I want to ask you a question. What comes before a word? Well, we hope that any of us, before we speak, we think. We have an idea. We have a thought. But that idea or that word that idea or that thought or that purpose is intangible. It's invisible. We don't know it until we crystallize it with a word. And a word is that expression of the thought or the idea or the purpose that we had in mind that no one could know about or no one could see. When he says that Jesus was the Word, he is the expression of God's purpose. He is the expression of God's idea. He is the expression of God's thought. He is that expression. He existed before the foundation of the world. And look what it says. All things came into being through him. And apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. Here's Jesus again. He shows us actively involved in creation of everything that we know that existed, everything that we see, taste, touch, hear with our senses, everything, principalities, rulers, all of those things were created by Jesus. And so he's explaining to us, he's revealing to us here who Jesus is and how that Jesus was that expression of God's purpose. Well, what was that purpose? Well, he goes on down here and he says, he was the light. He shined in the darkness. The darkness did not comprehend it. Then he says there came a man from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify about the light so that all might believe through him. He was not the light, referring to John, but he came to testify about the light. There was the true light, which coming into the world enlightens every man. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. Here is God's idea. Here is God's purpose. Here is the expression of who God is, bringing that expression to man. And man's response was, he came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him. He says, here's my purpose in Jesus. Here is my expression in Jesus of who I am. I want you to know me through Jesus. And it says, that was his message. That was God's message. And Jesus was that message. But man didn't accept that. He goes on and he says, but as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe on his name. We get a deeper expression of what that purpose was, of what God's idea was. That message, that expression was that the Father wanted intimacy. He wanted to know and to be known by the crown of his creation, and that was man. And Jesus was what? The firstborn of many brethren. He was the first one. He was that expression. as a son. He didn't say he gave them the right to become slaves or servants or to be dominated. Now, yes, he is Lord. He is King of Kings. And we do surrender to him. But we have this relationship as a father and a son. And his heart is one of intimacy. That's what Jesus came to express, that we can have that intimacy with the Father. He goes on and he says, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and reality, grace and truth. You see, everything that we have that reveals to us what the Father was like before Jesus was a type, was a shadow, and was a symbol. We interpret those things and we come up with a perspective of the Father. We draw a perspective of God from those things because they're just types, they're just shadows, they're just symbols. And it's very dim and sometimes very distorted, our conclusions that we draw about what God is like. Jesus came to clear all that up. Listen to what he says. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We saw his glory, the glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, saying, this is whom I said comes after me, has a higher rank than I, for he existed before me. For of his fullness we have all received, and grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, but grace and reality, grace and truth were realized or made clear through Jesus. Another word for truth is reality. So before Jesus, we had types and shadows and symbols. But then when Jesus came, he became the substance. He became the reality. He became the truth of who the Father was. And the entire embodiment of God was expressed in Jesus. When we want to know God's posture towards us, we look at Jesus. When we want to know God's attitude towards us, we look at Jesus. When we want to know what's God's heart towards us, we look at Jesus. Because John continues and he says, no one has seen God at any time. There's that picture. No one has seen God. He's invisible. Nobody has seen God. And yet Paul said, I want to know him. And I want you to know him. How can we know him as invisible? Well, he goes on. No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God who was in the bosom of the Father, he has explained him. He has made known the unknown. He has made visible the invisible. Jesus came to explain the Father to us and reveal to us what he was like. If we have any perspective of the Father that doesn't look like Jesus, our perspective of God is askew. Now think about that. Think about all of the things we've been told, all of the things that have been preached to us and taught to us about what God is like. Unless we see the Father through Jesus, we just see a type or a shadow of a symbol. We don't see the reality of who he is. Now, last time I shared with you, I believe it was the last time, I asked you to go before the Father and take your perspective and hold it like this. Hold it with open hands instead of with clenched fists and say, I know what's right. Everything I believe is accurate. Everything I believe is right. Instead of holding it like that, I encourage you to go before him and hold it with an open hand and say, Father, I don't know everything. I don't know everything there is to know about you. There are some things that I think I know about you that are not true. And I'm asking you to reveal to me firsthand where I don't see you correctly and where you have revealed yourself to me and I have either rejected it or missed it. I want you to reveal to me what you are like. Listen, so much of what we have is secondhand revelation. Someone told us, someone preached it, someone prophesied it, someone did something that communicated to us that God was a certain way. We looked at our circumstances and we said, well, based on that circumstance, God must be a certain way. And we have all of this secondhand revelation, if it was ever firsthand revelation at all. And I want you to understand, secondhand revelation is not revelation. Secondhand revelation is just information. And we know that knowledge, as Paul says, just puffs up. Information just puffs up. And that's what we seem to hold on to. We have this information that tells us what God is like, or my mother told me what God is like, or a preacher told me what God is like, or I looked at circumstances and I concluded that God was like this. But if the truth were known, what we hold to is not truth. It's not reality, because it's not an expression of God through Christ. We need a revelation. We need God's firsthand revelation to us. Well, you say the Bible is that. Well, the Bible was revelation at one time, but until he quickens it to us and makes it real to us, it's just information. Listen to what Jesus says. All things have been handed over to me by my Father. No one knows who the Son is except the Father, and who the Father is except the Son. Let me go back and read that. No, all things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows who the Son is except the Father, and who the Father is except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wills to reveal him. We need Jesus to reveal to us who the Father is. So I challenge you that as you go in your secret place, as you learn to spend that time in the Father, be open, really hold your perspective like this. And as you maybe read through John, just ask the Father, Father, I don't know everything. I don't know everything there is to know about you, that's for sure. And some of the things that I do think I know, that I have held on to. See, some of us, we not only have beliefs we die for, we have beliefs we kill for. Other people's reputation, other people's name. But Father, I want to hold my perspective of you like this. And I ask you to show me where my perspective of you is not an expression of Jesus. I want you to reveal to me what you are really like as you are revealed in the person of the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, let me just close with this as we go back on. We'll skip on over a little bit more in John. They came to John, they asked him who he was. You know, are you the prophet? Are you Elijah? Are you Jeremiah is who they're referring to as a prophet? And they said, no, I'm none of those. And he said, well, who are you? And he said, I'm a voice of one crying in the wilderness. Now, I always thought for so long, I want to be a voice. I just want to be a voice. I want to be able to declare who Jesus is and what he is. But the Lord showed me something one day. He was referring to John the Baptist. And he said about John the Baptist, no one born among women is greater than John the Baptist. But he says the least in the kingdom of God is greater than John the Baptist. That's us. We are not just a voice. Because he lives in us, we are an expression of the Father who lived in Jesus and by his Spirit now lives in us. We can't operate under that principle anymore. Do like I say, don't do like I do. Because the Spirit of God has come to live in us. We're an expression. He wants us to be that manifestation of the Father to the world, just like Jesus was. Primarily through our love, not through our voice, but first and foremost through our love for one another and for those who are unlovable and need to be loved. So I encourage you, go before the Father. Go in your secret place, in your quiet time. Hold your perspective open and ask the Father, show me what you're really like as you've been expressed in your Son, Jesus. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you like what you hear or saw, click like. If you subscribe on YouTube, you'll get a notification every time there's a new one out. Lord bless you. We're going to probably take up some more of this on perspective a little later on, but the Lord bless you.